Do you want the edge with every single weapon? Here's one tip for every weapon in Apex Legends. Let's just dive into it. While the Havoc is pretty rough to use without a turbocharger, there are two ways to sort of get around the charge up penalty. First, try to position behind cover until you can wide peek and all in with your 202 damage per second. And if you are approaching an angle you think an enemy will peek out from, you can spam tap your fire button to kind of edge the Havoc and have it ready to fire the second you see your enemy. Despite the overall nerf to the hipfire in Season 16, the flatline still has an incredibly strong hipfire spread, and it should be abused in the closest of ranges instead of aiming down sights, which normally just slows you down and makes you a lot easier to hit. Contrary to popular belief, other than saving ammo, there is no reason to use the single fire on the Hemlock. Switching from burst to single fire might make it easier to shoot, but you lose out on your raw damage potential, as well as what actually makes a burst weapon great, as it goes from 159 damage per second to a lowly 147. My tip for the R301 in Season 16? Don't use it. Being a burst weapon, the Nemesis is perfect for playing angles and putting out a little bit of damage at a time without exposing yourself for too long. You ideally want to build it as a long-range weapon and go for the occasional burst shots, rather than always keeping your charge at max energy, for the sake of your ammunition. That being said, keep in mind it has an incredible damage per magazine if you need to deal a lot of damage in a short period of time. The Alternator is a decent gun with decent consistent damage, but most importantly can be equipped with all SMG attachments. This makes it the perfect gun to carry as you are looting until you can swap it out for a better SMG like the R99. Try to get as close as possible when using the Prowler. Make sure that you can play corners to get the most out of your burst fire, and aim for the center of mass for the most consistent damage. This might sound like a cop-out, but as of Season 16, my best tip for the R99 is to simply use it. If you can master the recoil pattern, it's even useful towards mid-ranges. The insanely high DPS of 216 makes it the best weapon in the game. I'll also add that the default R99 skin is pretty bad, and I recommend getting something like the Outlands Avalanche with a cleaner iron sight to make it better off drop. Hell, with some of the pay-to-win skins, you can get away with no sight at all. While all SMGs have pretty solid hipfire when equipped with a laser sight, the Volt SMG definitely takes the cake, being accurate as you hipfire up to 10 meters away. Use this to your favor if you don't want to be hit as easily, since it allows you to avoid being slowed down, or if your sight or lack thereof doesn't allow you to aim comfortably. The car is a good weapon with good DPS and fairly controllable spread, but the thing that sets it apart is the ability to either use a light or heavy magazine, and choosing to use either light or heavy ammo. This puts you in a unique position where you oftentimes can choose what magazine or ammo that you want to carry. Make sure to coordinate what magazine you're using with your secondary weapon if possible, and keep an eye on what your teammates are running ammo and magazine wise, and ensure that you're stacking up the same ammunition as they're running for their own weapons, should they need it. I'll give you 2 tips for the devotion, because if you're going to run this, you're definitely going to need it. Despite having a turbocharger equipped, the devotion still doesn't start at a maximum rate of fire, meaning it ramps up both with or without a turbo. Because of this, you want to start shooting before peeking your enemy to rev it up to its maximum DPS of 210. The second advice: pick any other weapon. Seriously. The L-Star takes 24 bullets without a magazine, 26 with white, 28 with blue, and 30 with purple before it overheats completely. If you're shooting for that long, take a second and dodge your enemy's shots before starting to shoot again. If the enemy ends up being forced to reload, it will take that much longer for them to pull off the reload animation than it will take for you to let your L-Star cool down. The Spitfire will lose out in most 1v1s and mostly shines when putting out damage on unsuspecting enemies that don't shoot back, but if you find yourself in a situation where you have to duel an enemy with a better weapon, keep in mind that the Spitfire can carry up to 50 bullets with a purple magazine. This can be used to your advantage by wide swinging and full committing in a 1v1, and then making yourself as hard to hit as your hipfire, and then slowing down and focusing on aiming at your enemy to finish them off as they are forced to reload. It's really cheesy and really annoying, but trust me, it works. Most players are actually approaching the Rampage wrong, where they're trying to use it as a competitor to an AR like the R301, when they instead should be using it as a Marksman rifle with a 2x or maybe 3x scope, poking at longer ranges for some pretty solid damage, and then using a Thermite to charge it up if you get close enough to initiate a full fight, in which it will actually be a competitor to the R301. In the case of the Scout, the double tap has to be the most underrated attachment of them all, When I was measuring rates of fire through frame counting, it seemed like using double tap on the scout was a few hundred milliseconds faster on emptying the whole magazine than using semi-auto, but even if it was the same fire rate, the double tap scout has about half the muzzle climb of the semi-auto when both are shot at the maximum rate of fire. So if you can learn how to deal with the burst, which does take a little while to get used to, it is actually objectively better. The triple take's iron sight is actually closer to a 2x bruiser and can be considered a sight on its own. This is especially useful at its peak, specifically at the start of the game in the close to mid ranges where it shines for some early cracks and damage. If you catch an enemy in the open with a 30-30 ready in your hand, take that extra second to line up your shot and charge it up, and then follow up the first shot with normal, faster, non-charged up shots. The first shot should have chunked them for a bit of damage, and any consecutive shots should be enough to keep your enemy from running away at full speed. The bow kick is a great secondary weapon. While most people use it for the mid to long range snipes, it can also double as a shotgun with the shatter caps, so if you're running a shotgun as a secondary, consider switching it up for a bow kick. If you for whatever reason just want to deal one tick of damage with the charge rifle without spending time finishing the beam, you can start shooting, deal that damage, and then quickly swap your weapons back and forward to cancel it from completing. And before you ask, yes, this still consumes 2 sniper ammo. Also, you can charge up the rifle and aim at the enemy right when it's about to go off to raise your chance of cracking them in just a second. Just like with the triple take, the longbow actually has some magnification to the iron sight. This adds some value when using it in the early game, though you obviously want to get a good sniper scope on this as soon as possible. The Kraber is one of the few weapons in the game that benefit from stutter stepping. Stutter stepping is a technique where you move to one side but then counter that movement with a strafe in the complete opposite direction, and doing so will open a small window between where your character is about to stop moving and turns the other direction, where you have very high standstill accuracy. So if you line up your hipfire reticle and stutter step right when you're aiming at that enemy, odds are you're gonna hit them. The Sentinel has a bit of an economy trade-off as it can be charged up with shield cells to deal much higher damage for a short period of time. This is generally considered a waste unless you're carrying extra shield cells in the mid to late game, but is extremely underrated in early game and contests, as enemy teams rarely have better than blue armor, meaning that they can be one-shot or nearly one-shot from a well-placed charged Sentinel headshot. Although I advocated for the double tap for the Scout, I honestly can't say the same for the EVA 8. Instead, the EVA 8 can be used in a specific way which can completely counter both the Mastiff and the Peacekeeper. Let me explain. If the enemy is running a Peacekeeper or Mastiff in a shotgun fight, they're more likely to play bubble or an angle to peek in and out of cover and rattling off one shot at a time. If you have an EVA, you will be out-traded. So you don't want to play into their strength and instead wide swing around the corner while spamming them down with the higher DPS. You should win the fight even if they hit max damage shots on you. The Mastiff is a bit unique in which that it has a horizontal spread, which means it loses value the second you start getting a little bit too far from your enemy. Just like with the Devotion, I'm going to give you 2 tips for this one. Actually, let's make it free. First off, the horizontal spread means that you need to get up as close to an enemy as possible to avoid the edge pellets from missing. With that in mind, you might want to think twice about using the Mastiff against skinnier characters like Horizon and Lifeline. And finally, when fighting an enemy, instead of aiming for the head or the center of mass, you want to aim for the widest part of their body, which normally would be the shoulders unless you're fighting a Loba. If you struggle with getting good damage in with the Mozambique, that might be because it is one of the shotguns where aiming down sights actually tightens your spread. So unless you're incredibly close to an enemy, you generally want to aim down sights to maximize your damage output. And since it is technically a pistol, there's no movement penalty to aiming down sights either. The choke is an excellent tool to get value out of your Peacekeeper over longer ranges and have more consistent damage. But it obviously comes at a cost. It will slow you down. To offset the speed penalty, users can initiate a run slide, aim down sights, and then bunny hop while they keep aiming down sights. This allows you to keep the choke ready to go while still moving forward at a running velocity. You can also charge it up around a corner and peak, then aim at center of mass for the same damage as a full pump at way farther ranges. The large amount of instant damage allows you to outtrade almost every gun in the game. With the damage from the Disruptor and the larger magazine that comes with the RE45, you're able to deal over 400 damage against shields with one magazine. This means that you can theoretically crack the entire enemy team without having to reload. So if you're in a big 3 versus 3 team fight and the opportunity allows it, consider using your RE45 on all enemies' armors instead of focusing on one for the most optimal damage output. Though honestly, normally you're just better off beaming one of them. It's mostly if all of them are charging you, I guess. If you play controller, make sure to bind the shoot button to the right bumper or L2, as this will make it a lot easier to spam fire the P20. Although the Wingman is a great, consistent weapon across all ranges with its iron sights, especially without any slowdown from aiming down its sights on account of it being a pistol, that doesn't mean you shouldn't hip fire once you get close enough. The Wingman's hipfire is very accurate at about 5 meters away, so give it a try. You might find that it's easier to hipfire when an enemy is up that close. Also, when you are about to hipfire with the Wingman, make sure that you crouch right before so that your recoil tightens up. And that's all of it. But if you guys want more tips, specifically free tips for every tactical ability, check out the video on the screen. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow.